Gracie Jiu Jitsu rocks. Welcome to the Gracie Jiu Jitsu Rocks podcast, a podcast dedicated to Gracie Jiu Jitsu and all things Gracie, including self-defense, competition, anti-bullying, women's self-defense and empowerment, nutrition, and most especially, the people involved in Gracie Jiu Jitsu. This podcast is for the average Joe. It's for anyone who practices, trains, teaches, or just loves to talk about or hear about Gracie Jiu Jitsu. We'll explore the lives of Gracie Jiu Jitsu practitioners, how they got involved in the art, and what effect it's had on their lives. So buckle up and enjoy the ride. Welcome to episode 133 of the Gracie Jiu Jitsu Rocks podcast. As always, I'm your host, Marty Josie, and thanks for listening. Today, my guest will be Professor Scott Burr, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But before we do, let's start with our quote. Just because you're struggling doesn't mean you're failing. Every kind of success requires some kind of struggle to get there. Anonymous. Alright, Scott Burr is a black belt professor in Gracie Jiu Jitsu. He's the first person to earn the rank of black belt from American BJJ pioneer and 6th-degree black belt Professor Steve Maxwell. He also holds the black belt rank in Kodokan Judo and the Korean art of Kuk Sul Do. Scott is also a MaxwellSC-certified Pro Trainer and holds level 1 and level 2 certifications in both the MaxwellSC Kettlebell and Bodyweight training systems. He has appeared in many of Steve Maxwell's instructional videos as Steve's designated demonstrator and has traveled all over the world with Steve, from El Salvador to Croatia, assisting at seminars on everything from joint mobility to breathwork to kettlebell training to Gracie Jiu Jitsu. Scott is the author of numerous books on strength and conditioning and martial arts, and in recent years has had the opportunity to train with and learn directly from Master Rickson Gracie. In this interview, we get into his background and history in martial arts, his relationship with Steve Maxwell, his books, and how he got started in writing, as well as his current projects with Richard Bresler and Robert Drysdale, as well as his role in my book. So I know you're going to enjoy this interview, so without further ado, let's talk to Scott. All right, I'm sitting here and I have the distinct pleasure and honor of being here in person with Professor Scott Burr. So welcome, Scott.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to do this.
Yeah, man, I'm glad that we were able to do this. So I've had a distance relationship with Scott for a while as far as knowing him through Facebook and that kind of thing, and we'll get it all into that. But this is the first time I met him in person, so it's quite a pleasure. He was able to stop by Durham on his way down to assist with the black belt testing for Steve Maxwell in South Carolina. So great for you to be here. So I know there's a lot of things we want to get into talking about, Scott. Let's just start off by having you just tell us about your martial arts background. I know you've studied a few different arts, so start us off by telling us your background and then kind of what ultimately led you to jiu-jitsu as well.
Okay, I started in a martial art called Kuk Sul Do. It was basically the school in my hometown. It's a Korean style. The more well-known style that it's similar to is Kuk Sul Wan. It's pretty much the same style, but it's like Hapkido, kicking and punching, standing joint locks, couple of throws, no real grappling. Not much throwing. So did that, started when I was 17, did that all through the rest of high school, and then during college I'd come home and train hard all summer and like over vacations, and got my black belt in that in, I don't know, 2003, I think it was. And then when I came home, graduated from college and came home, went back to training, and it was right around the time that The Ultimate Fighter was getting really big, so like, you know, mid 2000s. And, you know, we, like a lot of martial arts, traditional martial arts schools, had always considered ourselves being like, you know, we're doing the real thing. We're really here to learn how to fight. And so when that came out and when that became really sort of entered the public consciousness, we kind of all were like, well, this, I mean, you're either sort of hip to what's going on or you're kidding yourself. And we didn't want to be part of the sort of world of traditional martial artists who were sort of, you know, kidding themselves. So we, the head instructor at the school, a guy named Jason Zakrajcek, he sought out jiu-jitsu in our city. There was a Hoyler affiliate. It was run by a guy named Donald Park, and then that school was taken over by a guy named Derek Branch, both of whom are black belts under Hoyler now. And so we started training with them. And, you know, we were really focused on MMA. We weren't a real, like, you know, we saw the way a lot of people saw at the time. We saw jiu-jitsu as a supplement to an MMA skill set. And so, you know, we were cross-training with the local Muay Thai instructor named Ryan Madigan, and then with Darren doing jiu-jitsu. And so, you know, I competed in some local MMA. We were into that scene for a while. We opened up a second facility next door to the traditional Kuk Sul school with a cage and with heavy bags, and we did all the stuff. And I started running that side of the gym as I got a little more familiar with, you know, Muay Thai and Jiu-Jitsu and some of the other sort of MMA specific skills. And you know, did that for a while. And then we met Steve, started getting rank in Jiu-Jitsu through Steve, and really started like falling out of love with getting punched in the face and falling more in love with Jiu-Jitsu. And we became, you know, eventually stopped offering MMA classes, became a Jiu-Jitsu school. Let's see, I'm condensing a lot of history. We eventually, you know, I got my black belt in Jiu-Jitsu, realized that I knew how to fight on the ground but didn't know how to get to the ground as safely or as consistently as I would like. Sought out a judo. There was a local judo school near us, run by a guy who had been on the Armenian Olympic team, named Gazar Grigorian, and started training with him. Trained hard in judo. Eventually got my black belt in judo, and that's now.
So like you said, that's condensed a lot. Let's go back and just explore a little bit more of that. You started jiu-jitsu before judo, it sounds like.
Yes.
But, okay, and tell us more about meeting Steve Maxwell. You eventually became his first black belt, and I think one of only, a few or a handful?
I think right now there are 3.
Wow.
There's me, there's a guy named John Lavin out in California, and then there's Jason Zakrajcek, also got his black belt from Steve.
Yeah, and there'll be a few more after this week.
Yeah, well, let's see.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Hopefully for them. So how did you meet Steve, and tell us more about kind of how that happened and how that relationship developed over time?
So one of the people, there was a couple who trained with us as we were sort of making our transition into MMA. And the woman, her name is Jane Easley, she was getting really into kettlebells as well. And, you know, Steve's the man in terms of kettlebells. And at the time, he was either still living in Philly or he was at least still sort of based out of Philly. And so she went to Philadelphia, met him, and got certified in kettlebells through him. And they really hit it off, and it was kind of like, at the time, Steve he had sold his gym, and he was, you know, he'd gotten divorced, and he moved into a Sprinter van, and he was sort of on the road. And Jane basically told him, like, look, we got this jiu-jitsu program at our place that's in its infancy. You can come to a seminar. We'd been doing jiu-jitsu for like 2.5 years at that point. We were all white belts. And Darren, who was teaching us, was a blue belt. He was running the Hoyler affiliate in Cleveland. So, nobody could get rank in jiu-jitsu. It was one of those situations. So she was like, you can, if you're driving across the country anyways, stop through Cleveland. You can park in our driveway, and you'll do a seminar and be great. And so Steve came, did a seminar. At the end of that seminar, he ranked a few of us. He gave Jason and I our blue belts. And so that was the beginning of being under Steve. And then,
what was the first thing you remember that stands out about meeting him? Is there anything that?
Oh God, I remember rolling with him like as a little spastic white belt, and he's like, "All right, let's start. Come start inside my guard." And I went to because I'm an MMA guy, so I went to get really low and heavy, to control the biceps, and I headbutted him in the teeth. I just remember
Which is great for your first meeting,
him being so I remember backing off and looking at him, and his eyes closed, and he's sort of sucking his teeth, and I was like, oh man, I'm so sorry. It was just textbook spastic white belt. Oh, and so it was a good first meeting, but we sort of hit it off, and he was around for a week, and so we hung out.
He's a phenomenal person, yeah.
He's such a unique person, and he's so. I used to say one of the things about him is I met him when he was in his late 50s. And I mean, for one thing, when he was in his late 50s, he was a beast. He was monstrous, and far better shape than I was in as a 26-year-old. But the thing about him was that he was very, and I think one of the most sort of endearing things about him was he's so open about his mistakes and his the process of his own learning, right? Because he ran a gym for 20 years. He's been a physical educator for 50 years at this point, and he'll tell you, everything he knows the way Edison built the light bulb, right? He knows all the ways that don't work. And it's because he's done it with himself and with the clients, and so he's tried and gone down rabbit holes with one mindset and realized that mindset was really limiting, and so his willingness to evolve in his understanding and his approach and his sort of honesty about that, because you meet so many people in all walks of life, but particularly in martial arts, it seems where people are very defensive about their past mistakes, or their if they ever people see it, and that's partially a cultural thing where people see it as a weakness if you ever change your mind or admit you were wrong. And he was very much our first conversations were I used to think like this, I used to do this. It's really unproductive, and it was very refreshing.
That's
to hear
exactly what I was about to say.
Yeah,
that's
from
the word that comes to mind. Yeah.
And it's, you realize too that that is not a separate thing from his incredible knowledge. It's the exact mechanism by which he's developed this knowledge, is to not just stay stuck in one pattern when it stops serving you.
Yeah. It's loyalty is a good thing to a point, right? Mm-hmm. To a style or to an art or whatever it may be. But you also can't be so constricted by that you're kind of blinded or unable or unwilling to look at different ways to do things, different approaches, and evolve. So it sounds like he's really been open to doing that and sharing that process and the failures along the way. And it seems like someone that really walks his walk, not just talks the talk. So
for sure.
That's cool. So it's great that you've had that chance to learn from and have that relationship with him. So what came next after so you got jiu-jitsu and then you got into judo. What stands out about your time in judo, going through that? Because that's not an easy thing to rise up to black belt, right?
No, I mean, so one of the things that so I just submitted my paperwork and got promoted to second degree black belt in judo, right, through the federation I was in, which, like, okay, it's like, I got a certificate, it's cool. But when I sent in my paperwork, I wrote them this letter that was kind of like talking about how I went from jiu-jitsu to sort of like, I didn't go from jiu-jitsu to judo. I love jiu-jitsu and I'm still doing jiu-jitsu and I teach jiu-jitsu. It's like, but I started to feel sort of less at home in a lot of the cultural aspects of jiu-jitsu, in that, like, coming from a traditional martial arts background, when we got into MMA, I remember thinking, like, so the Kuk Sul Do, the style I'd started in, very traditional, very formal. There's a grandmaster and he comes in and it's a very formal process to test and all these things. And when we made the transition to MMA, I remember thinking, like, MMA is martial arts for adults. Like, if you need a father figure in your martial arts, you're like keeping yourself in a child brain. And I had this and I was like, I'll never wear a gi again. I'll wear board shorts and a rash guard, and that's right. What martial arts is. And, and I think that whether it was, accurate or not, I think MMA got, part of this was created, this conflict, or this conflict between traditional martial arts and MMA. And, all the traditionalists were all kidding themselves and they were all just legends in their own mind, and MMA guys were the real deal.
Right.
And, they could, like a lot of these things where it's like, where a lot of people who think of themselves as realists are like, I'm willing to look the real truth in the eye, and you guys are all, whatever, lesser beings. It's like, I think a lot of that sort of narrative got presented. And so, when MMA came in and threw out a lot of the things that existed in traditional martial arts, it was seen as a good thing. It was seen as liberating people, and freeing them from these sort of, these beholden mindsets that were keeping them in some sort of cult-like bondage. And, the older I got, the more I came to feel uncomfortable in that culture. And I think that culture has permeated a lot of jiu-jitsu as well. This is like, you don't have to respect anybody unless they can tap you. It's put up or shut up. You can't come in here with a black belt and just expect to be, you got to come in and tap everybody and then we'll respect you. And that's a really, it makes a really strong martial art, and it makes a really toxic culture. Yeah. And a really toxic culture will kill a really strong martial art.
That's a great way to put it.
So I started to feel really uncomfortable in jiu-jitsu, and I was like, there's something missing from this. And so I started to feel myself drawn toward, like, even like the way the Valencia brothers do things, where it's still a very traditional, very respectful culture.
You know what it sounds like a little bit? Sorry to cut you off. You said you saw MMA as kind of an adult.
Yeah.
It's kind of like you saw that, but you were really more of an adolescent than an adult. And
right.
You saw like I don't want this little kid stuff anymore. I'm an adult, but really you were more of like an adolescent. Now you've progressed to adult and you see even more of the whole picture.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it. Where it's like, yeah, you think you're ready to be out on your own when you're 17 or 18, and you're like, no, you don't.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I started getting into judo because I realized, like, I was never a guard puller. I was never a guy who who was afraid to stand on my feet. But I realized at black belt in jiu-jitsu, I felt like everywhere we went on the ground, it was, I use the analogy sometimes of it like, as you gain knowledge, you walked into a dark room and then little lights are going on around the room. And as areas get lit up of the room, you feel more comfortable, you have more understanding, and then you're in a fully illuminated room. Well, jiu-jitsu, I felt like I was in a fully illuminated room, but getting to the ground, I felt like I was in a dark room with some light spots, where I could sort of have a pummel and then eventually get to a takedown I understood.
Right.
And I was like, I don't feel comfortable, especially as a guy who was teaching, I don't feel comfortable just being able to make it work. Like, I want to feel about takedowns the way I feel about what happens once we hit the ground. And so I sought out this judo school because, judo, they're experts at that. And also this guy, Gazar, is the man. And so I started training with them. And as I got into it, and I started to really, and I'm also like, I walked into judo, people have said, like, did you feel like it was easier to get better at judo having already learned jiu-jitsu? And what I tell people is, I think I was much better at being a white belt in judo having gone through it twice before. Like, I knew how to go in and say, to not, how white belts sometimes are in a huge rush to like, oh, I think I get it. I was like, no, I don't understand anything. You tell me what it is. I'm here to be a white belt and to be told how it works.
So you were able to empty your cup a lot more on that.
Hopefully, right? As much as I was aware. And so being in that space where it's like, I'm going to learn judo. I'm not here to supplement my jiu-jitsu. I'm here to be a black belt in judo. And I don't want this to be a thing where somebody comes in and they're like, so teach me the kata. And I was like, I don't know the kata. Like, no, I'm going to know what a black belt in judo knows. Because part of it was I wanted to know what one of my original sort of theses about it was like, I want to know what Maeda knew. What did Maeda know when he showed up in Brazil?
Right.
What was his?
Right.
And it's Kodokan Judo. So it's like, okay, I'm gonna learn that and see what that teaches me about jiu-jitsu, the jiu-jitsu I do now. And so I went into it, kind of looking to understand that, and got my ass kicked on the feet, got beat up on the feet for a few years, and then things started to click.
All right.
It was like, yeah.
How old were you when you started and finished the judo? Not that you're finished, but you know what I mean. You got black belt.
Let's see. I got promoted to black belt in jiu-jitsu in 2014. In April of 2014, I was 32. And that summer, I started judo. So I was 32 when I started, and I got my black belt in 2017. So I had just turned 36. No, I just turned 35 when I got my black belt.
So I've always said, and maybe this is a cop-out, that if I was much younger, in my 20s, I would very strongly considered judo. But being older, I don't want to have to go into all the falls and all this stuff. But I did get to work with the Brazilian Olympic judo team during the Olympics years ago. I was a sports massage therapist. And when they were in Atlanta, I got to work with their team, which was really cool. So it's a beautiful art. I love seeing it. I just feel like if I would have started earlier, maybe, but at this point, I'm trying to be as easy on my body as possible. But
there's a lot of impact, man.
Yeah, there is a lot of impact.
It was funny because it was like I trained a lot. I was like, this is my project. I'm gonna get through it. But it was the first time in my martial arts career where I was really aware of time, and I was like, because like every martial art, you have your period where you are just the nail, and then eventually you become the hammer. Right. And I was like, so your period of being the nail can last a year, it can last 5 years. It depends on how dense those years are.
Yeah.
Right? So let's say it's going to take 5,000 hours. Well, you can do all those 5,000 hours in 6 months, or you can do them over the course of 2 years. Right. It's like, I need to pack them all in as early in my 30s as possible. because I know the later and later I get, the worse and worse this is going to be. But it was still like, I used to, the judo school was about 15 minutes from where I was living. And I would go over there and I would train and and just get beat up. And I remember I would, it'd be warm. I'd go out to my car, I'd get in my car, I'd drive home. And by the time I got home, like we lived in this apartment that was above these shops. And so you'd park behind the buildings and then you'd walk all the way around to the front door. And it was maybe, it's a 2-minute walk. And when I got there, I would park and I'd get out and I would be in the shape of my car seat. And it would take me until I got to the front door to stand up, right? It was so brutal. Wow. But that's just normal martial arts stuff. Sure. But I was like, I need to do this at 32 and 33, not at 35 and 36.
You had that clarity and vision that you knew what needed to take place. That's good. So, before we move on, I want to move on and talk about your writing and the books. But before we do so, you've also, later in your jiu-jitsu career, you were able to do training with Rickson.
Yeah.
Master Rickson. Tell us a little bit about that part of your journey.
So in 2017, I was in a little bit of, I was still dealing with, so this whole process that led me to judo, where I was feeling a little bit less at home in jiu-jitsu, and I didn't feel connected to the culture, and I didn't necessarily feel like it just wasn't speaking to me. And I didn't want to do this thing where it was everybody, people, there are some people, I had a conversation with a guy recently where I was like, I don't care about the newest move that came out. It's not exciting or interesting or inspiring to me. It has nothing to do with whether I think that's valid or valuable or good or makes good fighters. It's just, personally, it doesn't inspire me. Just like my girlfriend loves what she does. She's does floral arrangements and for these events and these weddings and these dinners, and she just loves it. It just feeds her. And it's not what feeds me. So it's it's fine that people are super into,
sure,
okay, I learned this sequence, and they have a mind that really gets off on learning the 12 steps that give you this sweep. And I don't. But I felt like jiu-jitsu was it was very much geared toward those people. There was an onslaught of and I saw and I had friends who were they became successful competitors, and they put out video download series, and then I'd been working with Steve, and I saw his sort of was putting out video download series for strength and conditioning, and you see this model where you kind of go okay, this is it, where you sort of put together a product, or if you're a jiu-jitsu person, you come up with an idea, and then you put together a package of information, and then you package it into a DVD, and then you sell it, and you try to hawk it, and then you sort of do this every 6 months. And maybe it doesn't really, maybe it's just this year's product, or the way Men's Health is always coming out with a new workout. It's it's not better, it's just different. It's just another.
Right.
And I was I don't really want to do this forever. It's it's not interesting. I was running strength and conditioning classes at the time too. And I was I really believe Steve's got an idea about the workout where you need there are basically 5 movement patterns, and you need to work those 5 movement patterns, and that's it. And there's a way to work those most efficiently and most effectively, and that's it. And here I am coming up with new workouts for everybody every week, and I'm I don't care. It's just different for the sake of different.
Yeah.
And there are people who feed on that, but I didn't. Anyway, the point is that by 2017, I was still sort of feeling I don't know what my role is in jiu-jitsu. I could sort of try to come up with a little, whatever, my personal take on jiu-jitsu, and then try to sell it, and then go down the rabbit hole of people, talking crap about it on the internet, and if anybody even looks at it at all. And I was there's nothing appealing about this, and it seems a lot of energy out and not a lot of energy in. And so I was just trying to think about, like, you know, what am I really inspired? Who am I really inspired by? You know, who's speaking my language? Who's talking about jiu-jitsu in a way that makes me go like, yeah, say more about that. What's going on? And I was like, Rickson. Rickson's the only person. Like, I don't care. I don't care about anybody else, really. I mean, everybody else is awesome. Don't get me wrong. But personally, the only person where I go, yeah, what's up is Rickson. It's like, so I should just go try to train with Rickson, which is something that I had never. I mean, I just taken it for granted that, like, there's Rickson and then there's me way down here, and who am I? And I, you know, living in Ohio and, like, just feeling like, okay, this is my life. I'm in Ohio. Rickson's, like, in California with, like, the real people doing real jiu-jitsu, and I'm just me. And I was like, and Rickson, of course, at this point is like, he's a yeti. He's like, you don't see him. He doesn't do anything.
Right.
You can't find him.
You don't know where he's going to be when or what. Yeah.
So I Googled, like, randomly, like, Rickson Gracie seminar 2017, and the Albany seminar had just been announced. And so, like, I was, like, one of the first people to sign up, and, like, went there and ended up being one of the people that he called up to, like, work with. And I ended up working with him for, like, I don't know, it's like 9-10 minutes. The video of it is on YouTube, like, that whole seminar. But, like, I'm, you know, playing guard, and we're talking about
I'll put a link to that
in
the show notes. Yeah.
So there was amazing experience for me. And so at the end, you know, he's taking pictures with everybody, and I was like, okay, how do I train with you more? How do I, like? And he was like, I don't know, like, maybe we'll see, you know, maybe if you came out to California, whatever. And I basically just, like, okay, that's happening then. And I, like, tracked down people who could give me his contact information and, like, just bugged him until he was like, okay, you can go. And so, because, so I've been out, like, a few times and done a bunch of privates with him.
And the first time I ever met him was right after the first UFCs in Jiu-Jitsu started, probably within a year or two, a couple of years maybe. Drove down from the Florida Panhandle all the way down to Tampa and did supposed to be a couple-day seminar, and he was staying all week, so I kept just staying in. But I was walking in, and it was at this big college athletic room or gym. I opened the door to walk in, and someone walks in behind me. And I just kind of looked like that behind me. Now it's just a guy with a ball cap, and I did a double turn. I was like, "That's Rickson." And he just walked in. He's like just this down to earth. Hey, my friend, how are you? You know, down to earth guy, but he had this air about him that you knew he seemed chill, but he also seemed like, man, he could open up anytime he wanted. But it was phenomenal, you know, just being there. What's funny, I don't know if I've ever shared this. After several days of seminar, I was a massage therapist at the time doing sports massage, and I wanted to offer him something just to feel more connected and to, like, you know, hey, I appreciate you so much. So I go up to him and say, hey, I want to offer you, you know, I do massage. I want to offer you a massage. And he says, yeah, you have your table, and and I was like, I actually didn't bring it. So he says, well, where would we? I mean, and then I got thinking, man, this guy thinks I'm such a weird. I'm offering to massage him. Yeah, where are you staying, man?
Just come back to my hotel room.
I was like, oh boy, bad idea. But
oh man.
One of those things when you look back, you're like, yeah, okay. But anyway, phenomenal person, obviously, and continues to go strong and inspire many people. Let's shift over now, Scott, into your writing. You have written a number of books, or a few books. Tell us about those, and then we'll talk about your most current projects.
Okay, yeah, here, like I bought these for you.
Thanks, sir.
So those are, I got two novels that are available. One's called Bummed Out City. One's called We Will Rid the World of You. We Will Rid the World of You just came out over the summer. And that was a real long process to write, as was Bummed Out City. But I majored in creative writing in college at the Colorado College, which I don't know. That's a plug for them.
Sure.
Associate them with me. So I've been writing since then. Wrote a lot of novels, and none of them were very good. And then I think I finally wrote a couple that were okay. And so those are out. And
so this is Superhero Simplified, Collected, Selected, Revised, and Expanded. And you've got Suspend Your Disbelief, How to Build Strength with the World's Most Rugged Suspension Training Device. And I'm also holding Get a Grip, a practical primer on grip strength and endurance training and more. So
those are obviously training specific. Superhero Simplified was, when I was a brown belt, I started this blog that was just a place to collect jiu-jitsu, like thoughts about jiu-jitsu, strength and conditioning ideas about diet. I felt like, and that was kind of, the blog was my entry into the whole, let's come up with our gimmick and try to put it out. But I think I ended up actually writing some decent stuff. A lot of it had to do with the fact that, in jiu-jitsu and in strength and conditioning, you start to recognize the same hurdles that people come up against, and that they also sort of create for themselves and also sort of reinforce for themselves. Like, they will assert their hurdles in their own path to keep from having to expect more of themselves, or sort of there's a lot of stuff in there about if you're a person who has been complaining about the same issue for 5 years, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
How do you reframe it in your thinking so that you actually do something about it? Or do you recognize that you don't actually hate it? I mean, things like this. So
getting the self-limiting beliefs and
exactly,
that kind of thing.
Yeah. And there's some stuff in there that's very jiu-jitsu specific. Like, there's a bunch. I had a private client who lived in California who I was sort of preparing these monthly training packets for. So there was stuff about how should you construct your training? How much focus should you have on technique versus winning versus how to reframe your training time to think about the victories as if you have more understanding of a situation you didn't understand before. How do you identify your own inflection points? Like, things are going great for you when things are going great, but when things start to go bad, everything falls apart. What are the triggers, and what are your mental techniques that you use in those moments to try to get yourself back on track? That's and then great. The other two, Suspend Your Disbelief was, Steve, like I said, Steve's got this 5 pillars program, and he has this suspension device that he travels with that he made. And so I wrote up it's like a short little book about how to build the suspension device and then use it for an isometric workout. And then the grip strength stuff is like I mentioned to you before we started, rock climbing was one of my other really big passions in college. And so I was always, and as I was running the strength and conditioning program at our gym, I was always experimenting with all this different grip strength stuff. And there were some pretty basic implements that I made and some protocols that I used that were really effective. So that sort of
very cool.
describes those and how to use them and how to think about it. And so those are all available.
Those
are fun.
I'm excited to read these. The amount I've read of your stuff, I am a huge fan.
Oh, thank you.
I love your writing style. You're very gifted.
Thank you.
I certainly, anybody that's listening would definitely recommend getting a hold of Scott's stuff and diving into it. You've got some very exciting projects going on now.
Yeah.
Let's talk about those. You
All
got
right.
Richard Bresler, you got Robert Drysdale's books. Tell us a little bit about those.
So Robert Drysdale, people know, I think some people are aware that he's putting together this documentary sort of expanding on sort of what is popularly known about the history of jiu-jitsu in Brazil, because sort of everybody knows the Helio story, and that's, it's not an accident. It's what Rorion set out to do. So we all know that story, but we don't really necessarily know all of the other elements that were involved, and so like I was talking to Sonny right before, and we were talking about how like we take it for granted. We know this story. Elio really innovated jiu-jitsu and created this new style, but we sort of just gloss over the fact that you don't innovate in a vacuum, right? It's in the context of sort of bouncing against other ideas, against other resistances, against other practitioners and their efforts, that you're gonna innovate your style. So there's this shadow in the Elio story of all these other practitioners that he would have been competing against or working with or training with, and we don't know any of their names. And the truth is that during the early part of the 20th century in Brazil, there was a thriving martial arts community, people coming in from Japan, people teaching, different lineages starting up all over the place. And all these practitioners are sort of like, they're in the same mix. That's the same petri dish.
Right.
And it's within this petri dish that the Gracie family, makes their name. But the petri dish is as important as the Gracie family. And so
Sure.
There's a lot of credit that needs to be, given where it's due to some of these people who history is sort of forgotten a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so he's making this documentary about this, and then he wrote a book, partially to tell the story of making the documentary, and then partially to include the full transcripts of the interviews he did, because he traveled, did a bunch of interviews in America, and then he traveled all through Brazil, and he traveled to Japan to interview people at the Kodokan, Kodokan Judo practitioners. So he's all these old masters in Brazil, some of whom have passed away since he interviewed them. So it's just this treasure trove of information in these interviews, and so he wanted to compile all this into a book to so that people could avail themselves of it. And so I helped him, give him some editorial advice, and then I edited, formatted, and helped him put this together to make it available.
Mm-hmm. He's been working on that for a long time, hasn't he?
Yeah.
A ton of work into it.
A ton of work. Yeah.
So,
he really did something pretty incredible there, and it's a real service to the community. And everybody should check out "Opening the Closed Guard," the story behind the film.
And it's currently out. And
available.
So, yeah, I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. And then Richard Bresler. Richard and I were talking. That's how I learned about you.
Okay.
And his book, I want you to talk about that. But I will say I feel a sense of pride that I played a tiny part in that process, because we were talking, and he had for a long time thought about doing a book. A lot of people were always saying, Richard, you should write a book. And I think for him, like a lot of people, it can just seem overwhelming. You have all these thoughts and everything, but the idea of putting them down in a logical format is just like, oh my God, where do I start? How do I do this? So one day, after hearing him talk about it again, I sat down and wrote a little framework, and I sent it to him, and I said, look, you don't have to use this, or you can use it, but change whatever. But this just shows you how you might organize it, just kind of a possibility, hoping that would at least kind of give some direction. And I think it did. I think it made it a little more tangible that he might be able to do it. And again, it was a very small part, but I feel good. And then he did have someone who started writing, and I don't think that worked out the way he would have liked. So you entered the picture and really made the project happen and get completed. So tell us about that.
So I was Facebook friends with Richard, but I'd never met him. I of course knew who he was, and Steve had always spoken very highly of him and his knowledge of jiu-jitsu. And one day he posted on Facebook that he had a draft of his book, and he was looking for a title. And I was like, you're not looking for a title. You're looking, you want more than that. So I reached out, and I basically said, look, I know everything you need to do to make a manuscript into a book. I know I can make this into a book. Cover design, layout, formatting, editorial, publishing through Amazon's platform. I've done every other step of the way that you need and I'd love to help. Because, you know, it's just one of those things where it's like, I saw it as it's a match of like what I know how to do and what you need to do and what should be done. I mean, I was of the opinion that this book needs to be out and it needs to be good and it needs to sort of have its suit and tie on, have its best foot forward, get to be seen the way it should be seen. And I saw that I had, you know, my puzzle piece fit with the puzzle piece that was there. And so I basically said, you know, so I reached out, we emailed back and forth a little bit. He sent me the manuscript he had, which was about 30,000 words. And, you know, somewhere after around 22,000 words, it sort of lost its way. And I was like, great, I think there's a lot here. I think there's a story that you're not focusing on, which was, I mean, I've said this to Richard, and I really believe it. Like, I think Richard's a guy who, for one thing, he's completely underappreciated in the jiu-jitsu community because, I mean, who knows? No way of knowing what would have happened, but Richard is the reason the Gracie Academy opened when it opened. I mean, he put his money where Rorien's mouth was. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like he made things happen for the and much more than that.
UFC,
and
right?
with the UFC.
Yeah.
So I mean, he's a completely unsung hero of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in America. But I think because of the way a lot of people talk to him and they interview him, and you know, the history is so fascinating. People tend to talk about the history and they don't talk about him. And I was like, I said to him, Rorien is not the most interesting thing about you. You know, you have a story, and he's a bully, you know, and it's a lot of ways it's a classic story, and a lot of ways it's a very moving story. It's a classic bullied kid, fell into drug abuse, fell into, you know, depression and this sort of feeling of like directionlessness, and to go from feeling like, you know, I'm no good, what I am is nobody wants it, nobody likes me, and you know, to arrive at a place now where he values himself and his gifts, his particular gifts, and is valued for his particular gifts. It's an incredible story. And I mean, that is the story.
That is the story.
And it was in there, but it was so behind, here's this cool thing Rorien did, here's this amazing thing Royce did, and it was like, both of these stories are amazing. And they strengthen each other, but we can't have Richard Bresler's story, the Rorien Gracie story, right? Because, which was more or less what he had. And I was like, we need to tell your story if you're going to have your book. And so I was going out to California. This was in December of 2019, and I was going out to LA in January. So we had a chance to get together, sit down, did a private with him, and then we talked for a while about sort of the project and what we could do, and basically when I came back, you know, I'd outlined, I pitched him the idea about like, let's make this about you and your growth, and all this stuff is, all the Gracie Academy stuff is, it can't not be in there. It's all going to be in there, but we're going to make this a much bigger story. And so when I came back, we started doing this series of phone interviews. I went through a ton of old podcasts he'd done, transcripts of interviews with him, and I sort of compiled this massive body of text about, you know, sort of telling the story. And then I worked with this and organized the book into what it became, and you know, did the work, and now hopefully it's coming out next month.
Yes, and I'm going to have Richard on as it comes out.
Look at that.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful cover
Thank you.
design, and you have a knack for that as well. But before I move to that, Richard is an unsung hero, and I'm glad to see his story being brought forth and going to be out available to the public. And I hope it really helps people see just what a force he's been in jiu-jitsu in America, and what a great guy he is. So hope he's going to get some of that notoriety. I hope people are going to really want to bring him in for seminars and things like that. But the cover is beautiful. And we'll talk about mine in just a moment, because you were responsible for that as well. But great cover. You have a knack for not only writing, but really doing layouts and design and covers. Really, really good one with this.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Let's move on to my book.
Yeah, your book, man.
So
I love your book. Everybody should buy your book.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. I was like last October, I was in Florida visiting my mom up in the Panhandle. I'm driving along, going over this bridge to Pensacola, and it just pops in my mind, the idea for the story. And I'm like, man, that's a good idea. And I was determined to make this not like so many people do, where they just start overanalyzing or start, like you said earlier, creating their own barriers or self-limitations. And I said, look, I'm no writer, but I think I could tell this story. I think it could be pretty interesting. So around the first of the year, I started kind of writing, and then COVID hit, and I wrote more. And you can always say, oh, maybe this could be better. Maybe I should have done this. But I got to where I was, to a point where I was really proud of it. I knew I didn't have the skills of formatting it, or I know it needed some editing, especially my wife calls me the comma splice king, and things like that, and so certainly not in my wheelhouse. So I reached out to you and asked if you do this kind of thing, because I knew you were doing some stuff with Richard. So you said you could do it. So you got involved into that, and the part that I was thrilled about is the cover you came up with, because I had these ideas. I had reached out to some people. A couple of people gave me some kind of mock-ups, and you came up with something, and immediately it's like, wow, it just kind of resonated. And I've gotten so many comments on the cover.
Oh, good.
How cool it is. So props to you on that, man.
I'm glad to hear
it.
So
thrilled that you were involved in mine as well. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. I really liked that cover. It's like
dynamite, man.
It really, I thought it worked. So like the way I don't know how other people. I don't have any formal training in graphic design, but like, the way the shape of the words will kind of determine a lot of things, and the way that you have the nice column of words, and then your name is, you're not named George Stephanopoulos. You don't have it's still a nice column, and then you have this beautiful sort of fade, but then like as the cover gets darker, then the red pops of the mat, and then I just love the way that came together, of like the way the chapter pages. I was like, because how do it would have been very easy, right, to just like, okay, new page, chapter heading, quote, text. And I was like, well, something cool we can do here, right?
Well, it's very clean, right? But it also has pop. Whereas left to my own demise or devices, I would have probably made something very busy. And and the cover is very, very important. You want it to grab someone's attention, but you don't want it to be overwhelming and so busy either, right?
Right.
And so it was very balanced and clean, and that's the feedback I've gotten. Like, wow, it really stands out, but it's just simple and clean at the same time. So it's really cool.
Cool. I'm glad you like it.
So
Man.
yeah,
so it's still number one in what? Number one in sports psychology?
Sports psychology and MMA it was. I don't know if it still is, but it was number one new release in those. So very proud of it, man.
Number one bestseller on your CD.
Gotten some great feedback, and so
that's awesome.
You guys check that out if you haven't. So
yeah, absolutely do.
So when you're not involved in writing or jiu-jitsu, do you have any other hobbies that you do, or any other things you like to do with your time?
Yeah, sure. Let's see. When I'm not writing, so the 15 minutes that are left.
Right. Oh, inventing things. Well, let's talk about that.
Oh, yeah.
So you have a product, the Knot Lock, at thenotlock.com. So tell us about this and what it does.
Well, so I had I got a student named Eric Palmer, and he and I were talking. He approached me originally about starting a company to try to manufacture some of the grip strength devices that I had come up with, because I had all these like little odds and ends that I'd thrown together out of 2x4s and whatever at the gym. And he was like, let's manufacture these, let's sell these. I think there's something here. And so we started in on that, and somewhere in the midst of trying to figure out how that got off the ground, we took a sharp left turn, and he came in one day and he was like, people's belts come untied all the time. What if you had something like a neoprene sleeve that would da-da-da-da? I'm like, all right, like that's a good idea. And I went home and I was like, let me see what I can sort of mock up. And so I went home and I got some material and I started making prototypes and figuring it out. And, it was one of those things where, sort of you feel like the energy of the situation kind of pushes you in one direction. Where Eric started making these contacts with people who could do, the fabrication of this obviously is much simpler than a piece of exercise equipment. So he found people who could do the fabrication, and it came together. And so, basically it's a very simple, well, let me see, how did I say it in the video I showed? It's a simple but innovative garment accessory designed to keep your belt tied no matter how intense your training gets.
Nice.
Right? So I know there are people out there who, it's like, when I got my black belt, I was like, I wanted the perfect black belt, right? And so I would look around and like read reviews of all these different companies' black belts, and the most consistent complaint I saw, like, there were good reviews, and then there were complaints, and all the complaints seemed to be the same thing, which was this belt doesn't stay tied. And I personally, it never really bothered me that much to have a belt. I was like, okay, it's, par for the course. But there are people who it makes them crazy. I know, it's have your belt come untied constantly. Right. And I was like, perfect. Like there are people for whom this is a real, this really offers something. And also, if you teach a lot of kids and you're constantly retying kids' belts, this might really add something to your experience.
That would be a game changer there for sure.
So we created this item, the knot lock, and it's available at thenotlock.com. And if you're somebody who hates retying their belt, check out the knot lock.
For sure.
Or if you run a tournament and you're sick of people stalling because they constantly are, they let their belt come untied, require or contact me, and we'll come up with a deal, and you can give a knot lock to every competitor.
That's awesome.
And
great idea, man. You saw a need and found a solution.
Yep.
Came up with a solution. All right, so hobbies, and then I want to finish with a quote. So go ahead.
Quote.
Any other hobbies that you have that you do?
With
your 15 minutes.
Yeah, obviously the grip strength stuff. I love to rock climb. I love to do visual art. I paint, I draw. What else do I do? I got really into making bull whips.
Yeah.
That's a weird thing,
That's
right? Yeah, you can there's people realized you could you take paracord and take out the innards, and you get like a nice flat piece of nylon, and you braid that into it. So I got really into that for a while.
Cool.
What else do I do? I chop firewood.
Yeah. Chop wood and carry water.
Yeah, exactly. Right. There's we heat our place with wood, so
cool.
I got a lot of firewood to chop all the time.
So let me read you this quote, and you'll recognize it because I got it from your website.
Oh, no.
I just want you to talk about what it means to you. So, as to methods, there may be a million and then some, but principles are few. The man who grasps principles can successfully select his own methods. And that's from Ralph Waldo Emerson, who I love. So what does that quote mean to you?
So there's what's the quote? Style is the failure of technique. Is that the this idea that there's a God, I can't remember it now. There was this amazing exhibit at the Cleveland Museum of Art on Shinto, and there was a term and I can't remember what it was, but it was about the eternal manifesting into the specific and the temporal. And it was the reason that Shinto practitioners, I think the explanation was that it was the reason that Shinto practitioners had sort of it was a natural transition to go from Shinto to Buddhism, because it sort of felt like, oh, the Buddha is a manifestation of this deity from the Shinto religion. So there's this idea of, something eternal and constant that can find its expressions in various forms, and that within the very, if you look very close up, everything seems specific and unique and varied, and if you sort of pan farther out, you start to see that it's all sort of similarities it's all sort of leaves on the same branch, you'd say. I was never a big, there's something that it bothers me when people say you have to find your own way to do this technique. When in Jiu Jitsu, you hear people say like, oh, figure out what works for you. And I'm not here to say that that's not true, but something catches in my ear when people say that. And I think it has to do with people a lot of times, using it as they're letting themselves off the hook for not doing it right. Where they're just like, oh, I'm doing it my way or whatever. Where you go like, no, there's a reason that the right way is the right way. And I don't like saying right and wrong, but there's a reason that the way that is taught, or the way that is part of the master text or whatever, is there. And if you had done the thousands and thousands of repetitions, you would eventually arrive at the conclusion like, oh, this is how that works. Right. All of the knowledge of how and why is encoded into that right version. And then there's whatever you're doing, because you are going to create a version based on your understanding. Mm-hmm. Well, you don't have the understanding to create a version. You need to trust the understanding of the people who have it and do their version. And then you will learn through doing it what the right version is, right?
And at that point, you can individualize it, but not before you have the foundation of the quote-unquote right? With the sound principles and postures and structural integrity and things like that. So know how to do it quote-unquote right, and then you can vary a little, but because we don't have to be robots, but at the same time, you can't just do it how you want because you're lazy or whatever.
Well, I think it's like you need to know what things are doing. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, you don't have to... I think every solution contains within it the knowledge of the problem, right? The problem is encoded into the solution, because everything that's in the solution is in response, right? So if you understand, I don't know, this is probably a bad example, but like, say you do the standard single stack pass, right? And you see guys teach, okay, hide the other elbow, or do this or do that, right? And so, look, hiding the elbow or not hiding the elbow, that itself is not really all the information. All the information is, what are you worried about, right? So if you have to be concerned about the guy using the pressure of the leg that's over your shoulder to make space and put you in a triangle, you can correct that problem by hiding the elbow, or you can correct that problem by where you put the pressure on the leg, or how much emphasis you put. So understanding the nature of the problems, you realize like there are a lot of tools and in a complex problem, I can solve it by solving this element over here, or I can solve it by solving this element over here. They both solve the problem, but what's important is my understanding of the problem. Okay. And so having a rote, dogmatic relationship to technique without understanding of the problems that give that technique logic, it's not real knowledge.
It's true.
So I think that's sort of what that quote speaks to me.
I love it. It's great. Well, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, for sure.
Before, as we're bringing it to a close, Scott, anybody you wanted to do a quick shout out to before we wrap it up?
Oh, well, I mean, I just love to thank, thank you for having me. Sure. Thank you for entrusting me with your book. I know that was it was your baby, and you want to, that's giving it over to somebody to do something with is a big step. Thank you to Robert Drysdale for entrusting me. Thank you to Eddie Fivey for putting us in touch. Thank you to Richard Bresler for putting your trust in me and working with me to make this story. Thank you to Rickson Gracie for all your time. Thank you to Steve Maxwell for all of your time. Thank you to Jason Zakrajcek for everything you did for me and putting us on this path in the first place. I'm forgetting people. I don't know. Thank you to my little crew of students. So, yeah.
All right. Well, listen, it's been a pleasure and an honor, my friend. And I appreciate you being here with me and letting us get to know a little more about you and your story. And I wish you a long, healthy, happy life, my friend.
Thank you. You as well, man.
All right.
Much appreciated.
All right, really enjoyed that conversation with Scott. What a interesting person he is. All right, make sure you check out Robert Drysdale's book, Open and Close Guard, as well as Richard Bresler's book, Worth Defending, How Gracie Jiu-Jitsu Saved My Life. And don't forget about my book, See You on the Mat. All these can be purchased on Amazon. All right, up next is the Make a Difference, Make an Impact segment.
For 6 months. I dare you to shut out the world. I dare you to shut out all the distractions. I dare you to give up everything that is keeping you from your dream.
If you have a dream, don't just sit there. Get your ass up and make something happen. Sometimes you just have to move. Do something. Make a call. Reach out to someone. Google something. Learn something new. Write down what you need to do in order to make a better life for yourself. And be brave enough to do those things.
I dare you to take a stand today to say no more. I will no longer accept this for my life. I dare you to take action today. I dare you to write your goals down and get someone to hold you accountable. I dare you to hold yourself accountable. I dare you to give up everything that is keeping you from your dream, to say no to all the negative influences. I dare you to pick up a book instead of a drink.
I dare you to work harder than you think you did yesterday. I dare you to prove them wrong. I dare you to prove yourself right. I dare you to stand up as a man or as a strong woman, as whoever you are, and declare that you are going to claim a bigger and better life for yourself. I dare you to make something happen this week, to take massive action this week. Drop everything and do something. I dare you to walk more than you talk. I dare you to do good for the sake of doing good. I dare you to tell no one about it, to be kind for no reason. I dare you to spend time alone. I dare you to say no I dare you to walk your own path, wherever that leads, whatever they say. I dare you to lock the world out for a week and work on you, work on your dreams. You're well and truly capable of living at a higher level. If you do, or you don't, that's up to you. Ask yourself, am I happy with my life? Exactly as it is now? Am I happy staying where I am? If you don't like to answer, get to work. Work on yourself. Work harder than you think you've worked in the past. More discipline, higher standards, more self-respect, more boundaries, less BS. More forward, less backward. More positive, less negative. Only those who dare to go after the life most don't have will ever have the chance of living a life most will never have. Only those who dare to fight for a great life have a chance to live a great life. What's it going to take for you to change? What's it going to take for you to realize your potential? What's it going to take for you to be proud? Proud of the person you are. Proud of your effort. Proud of the person you've become. What is it going to take?
And that's going to do it for this edition of the show. As always, I thank you for listening. Hope you're enjoying the show. If you feel like you're benefiting from the show and want to show your support, you can support us on our Patreon page and a link in the show notes. Please like and follow us on social media and help us spread the word by reposting our posts and telling others about the show. You can leave comments on the website at www.GracieJujitsuRocks.com. You can also go to iTunes and leave comments as well as rate the show, and we would appreciate a 5-star rating, which helps us with our standing in iTunes. You can also leave comments on our YouTube channel. If you have suggestions for the show, please don't hesitate to give those. We always like feedback and suggestions. Okay, that's going to do it. So until next time, this is Marty Josie, and I'll see you on the mat.